let's I like maybe your topic is a good one for today. I think with expectations, because the middle of prep, end of prep, expectations are a big thing too, right? Not just
absolutely
like how much muscle you put on, how fast you put it on, how long it takes, but
exactly.
Yeah. So why don't we get right into that in the interest of time and just start riffing on expectations in bodybuilding. So where do you want to open that up? I mean, we both have thoughts on it, but your topic. So let's start with your feelings on expectations in bodybuilding.
Well, yeah, I think that the thing that's difficult about expectations with bodybuilding is that we've often mentioned the variability amongst individuals in pretty much everything.
Yeah.
And this is one of those areas where it gets really, really dangerous, especially with social media, because, you know, you look at some guys and they can put on 10 pounds of muscle a year.
Yeah.
And then other people are lucky to get 1 or 2.
Yes.
And there's so many factors that are at play in terms of age, training age, experience with following a nutrition plan, not following a nutrition plan, what sort of, like, for example, mass accrual there is, over the course of an off season, like actual mass accrual, sorry, not to be confused with like fat, right?
Yes.
Like
lean tissue. Yeah.
Lean tissue accrual. Like, and I just think that there's that it's very easy. Like, I think that a lot of people that, particularly the ones that aren't that well versed in PEDs, have this misconception that if you, well, first of all, there's the people that think if I train like a bodybuilder, I'm going to look like Ronnie Coleman, which is always a funny one.
Yeah, especially considering all the bodybuilders out there that are training at his level, Olympia level, who don't look like him.
Yeah.
Like, I've always, that's always perplexed me. People think, oh, if I just train like Ronnie Coleman, I'll look like Ronnie Coleman. It's like, don't you think everybody would be doing that? All the other top guys, if that's all it took?
Well, I kind of meant more from the perspective of natural, like sort of normal people.
Yes. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to say natural there. I meant normal. But like normal people, when they're starting out, they're like, oh, I just want to look like Brad Pitt in Fight Club. And, if I train, like a bodybuilder trains, then I'm going to wind up looking like Ronnie Coleman. No, you're not.
No.
Right? So,
yeah.
But that's the expectation of a lot of people. And then, of course, people also see some of the transformations that are happening in Hollywood, for example, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, you and I both well know that a lot of those are PED based transformations, but they don't discuss it. So it's again, people wind up with this skewed perspective, or they look at athletes, and not all athletes are clean. It's just the fact of the matter. And I think that it can create some really, really skewed perspectives, right? Both in a good way and in a bad way, right?
Yeah.
The good way in terms of, it's aspirational, all that kind of stuff may motivate people, etc. But if you get somebody who, wants to look like a bodybuilder or whatever, and then starts training and sees nothing happen, then you start to get disillusioned, right?
Yeah. So they usually feel that way fairly quickly too. It's not after 2 years; it's like after 3 months.
Yeah. No. Absolutely. Yeah. Definitely. And a lot of people don't realize like how long it actually takes. Like I remember this one bodybuilding podcast that I watch that's run by a friend of mine called Anabolic Bodybuilding. Run with Paul Barnett. I mean, he often says that like and Justin used to say this as well, but it's for a men's open bodybuilder, it takes 10 years of dedicated training, dedicated nutrition, and gear use to become an open bodybuilder. And people don't they just see an open bodybuilder. They don't really recognize that dude has been doing this for ages and being very meticulous about it for a very long time. In order to achieve that look. It didn't happen by accident, So I think that that's kind of the expectations versus reality equation runs particularly strong in our sport. A lot of it is also because the sport somewhat kind of brings it on itself too, right? In terms of, there was the whole, I mean, now is a little bit different because people are more openly discussing PED usage. But, for the longest time, like I'm sure when you got started out, as it was when I was reading Flex magazines back in the 90s, nobody talked about that stuff.
No.
So it was like nobody talked about it. So it was just like, okay, if I take my wider protein shakes and train 3 days a week, then I'm going to get huge, right?
Yeah. I don't know. Looking back, I don't know if that was better or worse, having it all under the table. Now it's all over the table, and people are talking about it.
Yeah.
Back then it was like kind of a mystery, and sometimes we would say, "Oh, Dorian Yates looks like he does because he's using IGF-1 or something like that. Nobody else is," which is baloney, of course. But because nobody knew anything, nobody was talking. It was really easy to have this mystique around it. There's always some secret ingredient was the thing that made you a pro, which went against the logic that obviously all these guys at the top level have access to similar things, so they would all look the same if that's all it was.
Yeah.
But even though that's very logical and very obvious, people still just dismiss that because there had to be some other reason, and now everybody talks about everything, and so now everybody's doing everything. So I don't know which way was better, which way is worse. I mean, both ways.
For my money on that, I think that I appreciated a bit more discretion. Because to me, the most important thing is nutrition.
Yeah, I agree with that.
As I've said.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to do that because it's hard work.
Yes.
You don't just pop it and wash it down with your favorite pre-workout, right?
Yeah.
You don't just go in and have a whole bunch of fun in the gym.
Yeah.
And test yourself and make funny faces and scream, right?
And just
the nutrition part is the part that sucks. It's the part that's hard.
Yeah.
But that's also the part that you get all the results from. So, I preferred it when it was more of like a rite of passage where, first you get the training down and then you get the nutrition down.
Yeah.
And then after that, then somebody, says, okay, now it's time for next level. Right?
Yeah.
Whereas now I just feel it's like there's so many people that are just like, oh, I'll just take a bunch of gear, and you've got these kids on the internet taking a gram of Trent.
I know, it's ridiculous.
That's I mean, for those that aren't well versed, that's an extremely large dose of an extremely powerful steroid. So it's like, it is like that's a pretty horrifying thought, actually. And you see like the damage that some of these kids are doing to themselves, like all sorts of cystic acne and and also looking like, I think for people, if they take too many PEDs, they wind up looking like drug addicts.
Yeah, they don't look good at all.
No, they look drugged out. They don't look healthy, right? So
the body's toxic. It's working so hard to deal with that, and that's, again, I go look back in the old days and people didn't look like that for a reason. And then maybe it was because people weren't talking about doing this and that. So there wasn't a kind of free license to just overdo it. It was more conservative because nobody really knew. So they're kind of conservative by nature. But I think people looked a lot healthier back in the late 80s and 90s.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah. No, absolutely. Like you look at those, like I always loved when I went to Gold's and I'd see that like picture of everyone sat outside on a bench or something. There's like 4 rows of people and they're all like, and it's like 70s or 80s, right?
Yeah.
But nobody's like particularly ripped, like, as in contest prep type shape. But everyone's kind of like, big and healthy, and they all kind of got that, like, I don't know, for lack of a better expression, just that kind of like D-ball look about them.
Yeah. And they're all smiling too. It's something.
No, exactly. Right. Yeah. Everyone's like, hey, this is awesome. Whereas, now you find a lot more kind of like, everyone wants to be hardcore or whatever.
And this is all, like you said, this all wraps up into the word of expectations of how long it takes, what it takes to do it, what is at the end of that road. besides competition, the expectation of that,
Yeah.
you know, and we haven't touched on it yet, but I think maybe because it's so obvious for us, but you know, the thing of genetics, you know, I talk about this all the time on the phone.
You know? I fight them all the time.
Yeah, you know, it's like everybody knows this, right? Everybody knows it. But yet somehow when you talk to people, they start talking about what's holding them back. They don't want to admit that. A lot of people, some people do, you know. My genetics are probably better than average, but not great. I know that. So therefore I'm not going to be, I was never going to be a national competitor. I wasn't going to be a pro. I knew that, you know. But some people just, even though it's logical to see the genetic differences in people, and you get the Phil Heath and stuff like that, and people just blow up, or, you know, Kevin Levrone would shrink down nothing and blow up against all genetics. Even though that's acknowledged and known, people still dismiss it when it comes down to their potential. They just think they're missing out on something, or they haven't started training biceps just right this time, or they haven't got the right protein source or something. Maybe it's just a little bit extra carbs and they're going to blow up. Their expectations are all over the place, even though they know genetically that's not in the cards for them. You know? And I think
it's a difficult pill to swallow, right? It's a really difficult pill to swallow for a lot of
that's what it is. It's very hard to acknowledge.
Fact, you know, I mean, that's something that I still grapple with. It's like, you know, I've been meticulous about my diet, my training. Like, you know, I've been meticulous about training for 20 years. I've been meticulous about diet for at least 15. I've been like meticulous to the point of being coached for the past 10.
Yeah.
Yet, you know, I still sit here in all of my massive size. If it weren't for the large t-shirt, you know, double XL actually, but yeah, you know, if it weren't for that, then yeah, I mean, I'd be sitting here quite slim. But yeah, it's hard to understand that based upon your genetics, you can do everything quote unquote right, and still wind up with your results that you get. So you know, that's the thing, and I think that's kind of like where this sport is probably crueler than others, you know. That said, I mean, you know, the analogy that I have learned to love is I feel like for me, I'm essentially like a 5'7" guy that wants to play center in the NBA. You know, that's really like what it is. I mean, I love basketball, you know, I love the position of center, blah, blah, blah. That's really what I want to do. But at the end of the day, I'm 5'7". So it's just not going to happen. Right? And that's where I think, and I think that probably has to do with, because, well, at least previously, the discussion about PEDs and stuff wasn't that open. So everyone thought that if there was some mystical thing that they could take, that it would change things. But in actual fact, it's just genetics. And
I think the basketball example is an interesting one, because obviously genetics difference, right? But the thing about basketball genetics versus bodybuilding genetics is that the basketball genetics are obvious. At day one. Like, you're not going to get taller. Not going to happen.
Very true.
But people will always have in the back of their mind, oh, maybe I can do something. Maybe I'm missing it to get bigger. I just haven't hit the secret combination. I just haven't done the right workout, the right nutrition plan, the right whatever. So there's always that kind of possibility they chase, which is really some kind of self-denial after the first couple years, 2-3 years. If you're not, you know, it's unfortunate to say to some people, but if you don't look like a bodybuilder after 3 years, you're not going to be a bodybuilder. It's not going to just change because of something. Whereas
so you're saying I should quit.
What's that?
So you're saying I should quit?
No, but I say you shouldn't be thinking to be an Olympia stage. You know what I mean? You know, you can continue to, anybody can be a bodybuilder they want to be. I truly believe that. It's just have a realistic expectation of how far you're going to go, what level you're going to compete at, and be okay with that. There's nothing wrong with it. I mean, people run track even though they're not in the Olympics, right? You know, people play basketball even though they're not in the NBA. There's no difference really, but just the expectation of how far you're going to go, which will also set, I hope, some kind of measures in how you treat or take care of yourself in that journey, with all the things that you can do in this sport to try to get where you're going. You should understand, if you know you drink the entire pharmacy, you're still not going to get on the stage of the Olympia. So that's something to consider, you know.
Very much so. Yeah, especially when you have people that are like trying to do this like all cost mentality.
Right.
And really throwing things away, you know. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a balance where you have to be aggressive, but not foolish.
Right.
And you don't want to be, I don't know that you necessarily want to be conservative all the time.
Right.
So, but you got to kind of like monitor your feedback and things like that. But it's just, yeah, especially like because there's like there's deaths, right?
Yeah.
It's the consequence, right?
Yeah.
It's not like you're going to twist your ankle,
No. Yeah. Yeah. You're going to have serious problems. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think even put PEDs aside, I mean, that's very obvious, but there's other things that can happen to yourself with, just stuffing yourself with food for a long time, many, many years. That has detrimental effects people don't think about.
Well, I mean, they actually say that like a lot of the quote unquote bodybuilding related illnesses in later life more come from the fact of walking around at 200 something pounds all the time, as opposed to something directly attributable to how you got there.
Right. Yeah.
So it's more about like carrying the excess body weight that your body doesn't want to carry. It's the excess food that you're consuming all the time.
Yeah.
It's all just very hard on the system, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's another hard pill for some people to swallow, including myself, honestly. I mean, I'm 55 years old in a few months. I'm about 5'8". I've almost always been, since 19 years old, about 220 pounds. I can go up to 230, 240. I don't drop below 215 unless I'm in a contest diet. That's too much weight for me at this age.
It's a lot of weight,
but to drop it is really, really tough. And I think Dante Trudell's been one of the ones who's been trying to get people like me, I've talked to him, to drop weight, because it's just like you say, it doesn't really matter what the weight is. You're carrying all that much weight later in life. It's hard on the organs, hard on the system. There's more tissue to maintain. It's more work for the body to do. So there's an expectation there about longevity and about quality of life that has to be considered. That's maybe not as obvious as people, or you don't want to see it. More than anything.
That's there's just so many factors, right, where this whole expectations thing kicks in. So like one of the questions, I guess, that people ask a lot is like, how much can I put on in an off season? Right? And I would say like a talented bodybuilder, as in genetically gifted, that's crossing the T's and dotting the I's everywhere, can put on 10 pounds. 10 to 15. A less talented person, probably more like 5. And someone challenged, maybe 1 or 2, or maybe even 0.
Possibly. And that's it has to be considered too after that initial jump of whatever you get the first year or so. That first year, you're going to grow like, almost any training, any food, you're going to put on some tissue because it's novel stimulus. The body's going to adapt. And it's a mistake sometimes to think that rate's going to continue as well, especially if you're unenhanced or if you're not genetically gifted. You'll peter out pretty quick. The body's just like, nope, I don't want to carry more tissue. I'm not going to do it. I don't care what you try to make me do.
Definitely. Well, I mean, that was like, I think I shared with you before about like when I first started training, I had a little bit of like change in body composition and looked a little better and stuff like that, but I got strong as hell, right? And it was like, I was like 140 pounds, but ripping 140 kilos for 10 on deadlift, right?
That's good.
So I was super strong. Still tiny, right? And it was like, it didn't matter how much I was lifting. The body was just like, no, I'm fine where I am.
And that's also something to consider too, is that strength and size don't necessarily always correlate.
Oh yeah, not at all.
There's so much that goes into strength, like, limb length and, tendon connections and stuff like that. We all knew kids in high school who are freakishly strong, but not particularly big. Benching 315 at 16 years old, I don't know why. They had no muscle on them relatively, but I couldn't do that. And I was bigger than them already at that time, but I couldn't do it. So
no, and actually that's interesting too, because I think that particularly in the materials that are available for people that are newer to lifting with weights and stuff is they sort of, well, like I remember that the big things when I was starting out was like 5-3-1 or starting strength and you know, things like that, right? So it was always like the sort of, you know, 5-rep type area, right? You know, if you want to get strong, and everyone who's strong is big. Like, have you ever seen a really big guy that's not strong? Da da da, right? But it's like it doesn't work like that, you know. Like,
yeah. And strong is a big range too. It's not, you know. Again, I refer to Dante because he always comes with these good ones where he talked about like the kid I talked about in school who was benching 300 pounds at 16. It wasn't particularly big. And you take someone else who's like me, who was benching like 150. But when I worked my way to 300 pounds, I added so much more tissue than the other guy. So it's not about how strong you are, but how much stronger you get.
Yeah.
And you know, nutrition connected to that strength that adds the muscle tissue. So people tend to think about ultimately how strong you are is going to be how big you are, but it's not. It's about how much of a jump you make, how much of a gain you make over your baseline.
Yeah, I'd say there's truth to that.
Yeah.
Another one that I think that's actually another area where expectations kind of come in as well, and that's the progressive overload is, of course, a very hot topic. And I think that like people have difficulty with the rate of progression and the expectations surrounding the rate of progression and what progression actually means. So I remember, well, I don't remember, it was until quite recently, you know, I had although I always knew that the qualitative elements were just as important as the quantitative, I did have a very Dante Trudel inspired beat the logbook at all costs, Jordan Peters inspired, must, you know, do not miss this lift, right? You know, I had that mentality, and I have all the tears to prove it. But yeah, just sort of like the expectations surrounding rate of progression and stuff, and the ability to progress, I think was is something that people should also really think about, because it's not. I mean, you and I can go into the gym, and let's say we have the same strength, right? Today. Next week, you may be able to do another rep at the same weight. I might not.
You
know, my form might have to severely be compromised in order to get that.
Right.
So does that rep count or not? Right? You know, so that's the so I think that, like, you know, to me now it's much more impressive when I see somebody lifting with perfect form. For however many reps it is, as opposed to moving the heaviest weight possible, or, you know, like even worse is when it's poor form and low weight, right?
And that's where expectation can override reality, where they think, oh, I've got to push this amount of weight, or I have to go for this target, and they're approaching that target wrong, and therefore then they're not going to get the results they want, and maybe get injured too. So really got to stop and think about these things, you know, which is hard to do in the middle of it. You think, like, if you are subscribing to a very regimented progression model, you know, you may not be able to do that. Not everybody can progress like Jordan Peters.
Sure. And you know, they have a lot of those programs that are available, like the old Soviet style weightlifting programs, or what are they called, Shakeoff and stuff like that.
All the books.
What's that? So like I did a couple of those. Like Smolov and Smolov Jr. No, I did that stuff, and that was like, that didn't work, you know. That stuff was great until all of a sudden I just felt like literally all of my tendons just going, what the hell are you doing, right? You know.
Because again, you're talking about elite people, and they talk about the Soviets. I mean, they took young kids and trained them up, and they matched the right parents to have the right kids, and you know, it was all quite planned. It's not just
Documented.
regular people who want to do it because they want to do it. You know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's just,
Actually, I saw, can't remember if it was YouTube or if it was just on TV, but I saw how the Chinese weightlifting team recruits kids from about grade 6.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, no, they go around and they measure the proportion of the limbs and stuff,
Makes
and
sense.
then natural sort of like, so one of the things they were testing was broad jump, right? So how far somebody can jump, and yeah, it was just like all of these basic metrics, but you could see that there were kids that were just like way head and shoulders above the rest.
Yeah.
And then so then it was like, are you interested? You know, blah blah blah, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's how you do it. You plant young and water it and take care of it, you know, from early stages. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Again, people look at these people, whatever sport they're into, and think like it's just about effort and stuff, and it really isn't. You know, sometimes you have to be realistic with yourself. Yeah.
Another funny one where expectations and reality really got me was my first cut, like to get stage weight.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know what your experience was like, but
I was an idiot. Mine doesn't even count.
for mine, it was hilarious because I had spent 18 months, I think, you know, trying to put some size on, etc. And I'm pretty sure I started my prep at 185. And then, you know, 10 pounds came off and still cutting butter. 20 pounds came off, still looking blubbery.
Yeah.
30 pounds came off. I'm like, okay, now I'm starting to look a little bit better, but still a long way to go.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, I had visions of striated glutes and all that sort of stuff, right? You know, my first show. And yeah, just it kept going and going and going and going, and the weight kept getting lower and lower and lower. And I was just like, you know, by the end of it, I think I stepped on stage about 140, 145, something like that. Yeah. And it was just this process of like, I just had no idea how much I had to lose.
Yeah. Yeah, that can be very disheartening.
Well, it's funny because I've actually had the same thing this year too, right?
Yeah.
Like, I started the prep at like 205.
Yeah.
So I thought, I don't know, 180-ish, right? Something like that. Nope. Yeah, I'm just leaving it at that. I'm quite happy with the look. I don't know where I'll land.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm not, you know, and right now I'm in the trough. So,
yeah. You'll come back up.
It would be unfair to reveal my weight at the moment. And
yeah, we'll keep that a secret.
Stage, badly depleted at the moment. So
yeah, we'll keep that under the table for now. Yeah. But no, I think that this is a fun topic. I don't want to bore our listeners too much. I think there's a lot of time on it. I'd be interested to hear what other people think about expectations too, if they want to put some comments in. You know, if anything we missed. How they feel about their personal experiences about starting out and looking down the road, or maybe even like, you know, they had a buddy who was training with them and they shot off or they shot ahead of them or whatever. Those kind of stories are always interesting to hear.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think we touched on it a little bit this time, but maybe we can jump into the next chat and talk about volume a little bit, because I think it's a hot topic these days. So why don't we take a quick break and come back and talk about our feelings. I think we're going to be a little bit different on this, which would be good. Thoughts on volume. So why don't you take a quick break, Craig, and we'll be back in a moment.
Sounds good. I'll try not to die in the meantime.
Okay.